Cover 3 Tailgate. And welcome back to the Cover 3 podcast here on CBS Sports. That's Tom Fornelli. That's Danny Kanell. I'm Chip Patterson coming to you live at youtube.com/cover3 and everywhere you get your podcasts on demand. Thanks for hanging out. Smash that subscribe, smash that like, and come and join us in the chat, a.k.a. the Cover 3 Tailgate. We're at 8:25 a.m. Eastern Time. Ian was so fired up to get me the first one into the parking lot, pull open, get his spot, and say, I need to know what Danny's immediate tweet will be if Duke wins at all while beating an SEC team. That's right, because the left side of your 2025 Final Four bracket will feature Auburn against Florida. Then you've got Duke against Houston. So if Duke does make it to the last Monday night of the season, they will be playing a team from the Southeastern Conference. What do the drafts look like, Danny?
You'll have to wait and find out. I never like rooting or celebrating before something happens, so we'll see how it goes. But I'm curious to know, Ian, with his Georgia logo, who's he rooting? Like, has he just got the pom-poms out for Florida or Auburn? Like, which team is your favorite now? Because that's what you have to do. You have to be rooting for those Gators, I guess, or the Auburn. Like, that's your choice. And I guess, do you celebrate as much? Like, is it as much of a party when Auburn or Florida could win the title? Is that how it works?
And that is how it works in football, with the rest of the conference celebrating anytime an SEC team gets to a national championship game. It appears as though the entire conference is, donning whatever colors they may be. Recently in football, it has been red and black. Ian maybe owes some rooting interest back to Florida fans, back to other fans that have been that have been supporting the Dogs during their recent title runs.
First, I'll start with a fact. All right. The SEC has lost 12 tournament games. The Big 12 and the ACC combined have only lost 9. So
combined.
I mean, that's just what the hell. No, my favorite thing is I have been tracking like the conference records, right? And after every day of the tournament, I tweet and update it of the conference records. And there's this one Oklahoma fan who's like responding to all of them, talking crap about all the other conferences, talking crap about the Big 10. And like riding so hard for the SEC, like an Oklahoma fan. They've only been in the league for a year. And combined in conference play, their football team and their basketball team went 8-18. And they're sitting here riding so hard for a conference that has beaten the shit out of them since they've joined it. Like, what is your deal, bro? But anyways,
relationship. That is toxic, bro.
Like you got to the tournament and got booted right away. Your football team went 2-6. Why are you riding so hard for the SEC? It is strange.
It's a lifestyle. Congratulations to all 4 of our number 1 seeds. I don't think a lot of people know this. Did you know this is only the second time ever we've gotten all 4 number 1 seeds to the Final Four?
You know what another fun fact is?
What?
The last time it happened?
Yeah.
San Antonio.
What?
Yep.
Wow.
Whoa.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, lots of breaking news here.
Something about that Riverwalk only draws the best.
This is why you tune into the Cover 3 podcast. Again, Eye on College Basketball Podcast got you covered with everything. Jumped on the Saturday night reaction show. Felt like throwing on an old comfy pair of pants. It was Saturday night. It was 11:30. We were reacting to what we just saw, but enjoyed doing that. They will have much more getting you set for that San Antonio-based Final Four. But we have a little bit of breaking news here on a Monday morning. We discussed, the outlook for Stanford after Andrew Luck fired Troy Taylor. And if you need to know anything more about who's calling the shots here, let's look at who was just named the acting and interim coach for the Stanford Cardinal in the 2025 season. It is former Indianapolis Colts. He was head coach, right? Or just offensive coordinator? Yeah. Former Indianapolis Colts head coach Frank Reich will be the acting coach. Now, according to ESPN's Pete Thamel and others, I know our Matt Zenitz was on it as well. This is not a tryout. This is we'll do 1 year and we'll see. the way that both parties are approaching this, Stanford and Frank Reich, is we are just doing this for the 2025 season, and a national search will be conducted to find out who will be the permanent replacement for 2026 and beyond. Tom, what do you think about this move? You've got you do not have a good hand. You are Stanford football. You were already dealing with a win total of about like 3.5, and that was with a head coach who had been working on building this roster up for year 3. Now, is Frank Reich? I think it's pretty good, considering everything that we've got. Like, I don't know who was going to name it, but at least you've got somebody who's bringing in a little bit of expertise and maybe going to be able to keep that locker room together.
Yeah, I don't think you're not in a very good spot, and you're getting Frank Reich, who, like you managed, he was the head coach of the Panthers, he was the head coach of the Colts, and he'd won a Super Bowl as the offensive coordinator with the Eagles. Like, he's been a respected offensive coach in the NFL for a few years now. So when you look at that kind of resume, to get him to come in, I think you could argue is probably as good as you were going to get. The odd part of the situation is, and what I want to see how it plays out, is like when you're announcing this, you're announcing he's only going to be there for 1 year. And I know that in the way the college sports work now, more so in basketball than football, but everything is so like transactional that rosters change in one season. But I do wonder how it's going to work in that locker room. Like, if they get off to a slow start and everybody on that team knows he ain't back next year anyway, like, I do wonder how that could impact them during the season.
How did this name not get connected when they had all like the Andrew Luck ties? I never saw Frank Reich. Did you guys? It was like Pep Hamilton. It was David Shaw. It was like all these connections. And then nobody looked at who was his quarterback coach and when he was in Indy early in his NFL career. And I believe there was an article written about how when he retired, he was going back and he kept all these relationships with, former people that he had been close to. This feels very similar to when Jim Grobe took over Baylor. Remember that? It was like a 1-year deal. But I do think there's one difference. I think Grobe was very much like, it was not a trial to see if he could be the head coach for the future. It was like, no one wanted it. He's like, I'll step up. I have character, like all these types of things. I think Frank Reich brings you some gravitas. So you're Stanford, right? You've got a former NFL coach right there, kind of hold the fort down. But I also wonder if Frank Reich is curious what he looks like in the college game. Like maybe this is one where both sides are kind of feeling it out. And by releasing out that, hey, it's only a 1-year run, it takes some pressure off, leaves open the door in case it doesn't work, and it is as bad as we probably all think it will be. Then it's like, hey, this doesn't really tarnish Frank Reich's reputation as a coach. It's like, it was, I helped him out. But I think if he does, if he's surprised to the upside, which I think making a bowl would be a massive accomplishment, if he gets to 5 wins, something like that, and it works, and he gets along with Andrew Luck, and they have a good working relationship, I wouldn't be shocked if he has a chance at parlaying this into the head coaching job.
I don't know if he wants it. I feel like Frank Reich wants an NFL gig, and this is to help an old friend and do some coaching while you wait for an NFL gig to come open. Maybe he does. I don't know. I know this joke's been used, but I do think it's funny that there will be an ACC game between North Carolina coach Bill Belichick and Stanford coach Frank Reich this season.
Incredible.
That is wild.
He's an ACC legend, former Maryland.
Yeah, Maryland Terp. Maybe he could coach. Maybe he's just killing time until basketball season when he takes over the basketball program at Maryland.
He will also be, making traversing around ACC country where he was a Carolina Panthers quarterback, even before he was the Carolina Panthers 1-year head coach. I know he's got family in the either Greensboro or Charlotte area as well. But he'll be in Palo Alto, most of the time here. I am curious about there is a positivity that he could bring to this Stanford team. Like in terms of just the overall coaching acumen, right? I mean, he's a good ball coach.
Mm-hmm.
This is a Stanford team that lost a coach in Troy Taylor, who is a little bit more offensive leaning in terms of his own expertise, who was trying to construct an offense that was going to be effective. He'd gotten, Elijah Brown and a couple other quarterbacks that we had discussed before. The Jim Grobe thing was like, we just need an overseer, I think that Frank Reich at least gives them the potential to be a coach so that they can go out there and be competitive. The bottom, the ACC right now is built like this. There's 4 teams at the very, very top. Then there's like 10 teams that you can't figure out one from another. And right now, Stanford's down there in the bottom. And I would say that hiring Frank Reich at least gives them a chance to pick off one of those 10 teams that are all just in the muddy middle. Hiring Frank Reich ain't going to get you a win against one of those teams at the top of the conference, but at least brings some coaching competency that allows this to not necessarily be a foregone conclusion that this team is going to go 1-11 or 2-10, 0-8 in ACC play. That's still my prediction, but I would still say that this at least gives you a better chance that I've got Tom. I've got him beaten.
Hold on. You're selling it. You're hyping it like, listen, he's not going to beat the best teams, but having Frank Reich, that'll help you win some of them mid-tier games. By the way, I still have them going 0-8.
This gives me more confidence in the coin flip game against San Jose State that I gave to the Cardinal when they made me put my name to it and write down every win and every loss for every ACC team. I had them coachless beating Hawaii and San Jose State. Now I say they could rivalry, throw it out the window. They could beat Cal. Frank Reich can get them a win over the Bears. All right. So again, like I sort of introed this now just drives it home. This is like Andrew Luck, athletic director, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, is he going to make the hire too?
I assume so. I mean,
if he's deciding to fire, if he's deciding to fire Troy Taylor, he's deciding to hire Frank Reich. I'm assuming he's the one deciding to hire who the next head coach long-term is going to be.
We touched on it a little bit last week. Like, Stanford treats its athletic department very differently than all these other schools. The athletic director at Stanford might be like, I don't have time to dedicate 90% of my time to the football team. I'm hiring Andrew Luck to run the football team. That is his job. I think he's responsible. I think he had pressure to fire Troy Taylor, but I think he's 100% responsible for hiring his replacement.
Interesting. Again, this news breaking on Monday morning. Frank Reich will be the acting head coach for the Stanford Cardinal. Well, from a coach who is agreeing to a 1-year, I'll go out there and give it my best shot, boys, to a coach who just signed a new contract extension that is packed with expectations. What to make? Deion Sanders being college football's latest $10 million man. All that and more next.
The clock never stops. Relive the greatest moments with uninterrupted highlights and more.
It's Gareth Bale! Wonderful goal!
On the UEFA Champions League channel. Streaming free.
Back here on the Cover 3 podcast. Well, Friday afternoon news came down as head coach Deion Sanders and Colorado have agreed to a contract extension, a 5-year, $54 million extension that will run through the 2029 season. His base salary will increase to $10 million for the 2025 season. He is now the highest paid coach in the Big 12. And really, we don't know all the private school details here, but he is believed to be among the 10 or so highest paid coaches on an average annual value moving forward. If he stays for the entire length of the deal, by 2029, he will be making $12 million. This more than doubles his salary 2 years into his tenure. And as I mentioned, it kind of sets some expectations in terms of, what should be happening on the field. And now that we no longer have Shedeur Sanders, we no longer have Travis Hunter, and of course, we no longer have Shiloh. Danny, what was the lens that you used to look at this news in terms of, what stood out as being sort of significant or important?
Worth every penny is the way I look at it. Like, I think it's money well spent if you're Colorado. I talked to Jeremy Bloom a year ago, the former Olympic skier and also Colorado wideout, and he was talking, and I've talked to Joel Klatt, talked to a lot of former Colorado people. He has resuscitated Colorado's football program. I mean, this was a place when I was in high school, this was a national champion, co-national champion. This was a perennial powerhouse in college football. And they had been an afterthought, irrelevant, empty stadiums. I remember a very prominent writer who I can't stand, so I won't say his name, had said when Deion was hired, was being like, these pothead liberals are not going to relate to Deion Sanders. Like, he's not going to be able to, he's not going to bring any energy into this program. And he could not have been more wrong. He's done exactly that. And I think, and when, by the way, when I talked to Jeremy Bloom, it was during the 4-8 season.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, they were talking about giving him a messy deal, like give him some of the, royalties and really incorporating some way to keep him there. I think it's great. I think it's great for college football. I'm pumped. I don't think it means anything as far as like on the field this year. It's going to raise those expectations though, Chip. That's the one thing I think is going to be really interesting. But as far as I think it's worth every penny. I think it's money well spent. He's earned it too.
Yeah, like I wrote a column on this on Friday, and I said pretty much the same thing. Like, it's well deserved, and it's a smart move on Colorado's part, because for everything you just mentioned, like, we're talking about Colorado right now. And obviously anything with Deion is going to draw a reaction, and that's part of the whole situation. Like, I write this column, I put it out, Facebook, social media, everything. And all the responses are either exactly or hell no, this is stupid, he ain't worth it, blah, blah, blah. And that's exactly the kind of reaction that he always gets. But if you look at it, Colorado, like, I don't have the list of the teams in Big Noon Saturday, but if you look at Big Noon Kickoff in the 2 years since Deion has been at Colorado, Big Noon Kickoff has been at a Big 12 game 12 times. Colorado was playing in 7 of them. Colorado is the only TV draw, if you think about it realistically, in that league. Like, if Kansas State and Iowa State are both ranked in the top 15 and playing late in the season, they might get that Big Noon kick because it's got playoff implications. But Colorado is the only team in that league that is drawing eyes regardless of the record. And we saw that in his first year when they went 4-8, and they didn't carry him as much late in the season, but they carried him a whole hell of a lot for the first half of that year, and the ratings were doing fantastic. And you look at that situation, like, that helps Colorado, that helps the Big 12. And if you look at the future, if Deion is still there when the great culling comes or the next round of, conference consolidation, he makes Colorado attractive because they get eyes on television. They get attention. So he's putting Colorado in a position where it will be in demand by the new whatever the hell this sport looks like in a few years. So $54 million, that's nothing. And then people got upset because he's getting $10 million a year, which puts him in the top 10. Well, do you know who the 9th highest paid coach was last year? And he's not in the top 10 anymore because Belichick and Deion have passed him up. He's now 11th of the salaries we know. Mark Stoops. Was anybody super angry when Mark Stoops got paid over $9 million a year? And I'm not saying he doesn't deserve it.
Right.
But nobody cared. He hadn't won the conference. He's won 10 games once. He doesn't have these huge accomplishments. He hasn't had anybody on his team win a Heisman. Nobody cared when Mark Stoops got $9 million. Nobody cares that Eli Drinkwitz is getting $9 million. Nobody cares that Josh Heupel's getting $9 million, and they're all up near the top 10. But Deion does, and who's accomplished more in 2 years than you could argue they have. Draws a big, big angry response.
It is a little bit surreal, I think, to read official university releases where the university president and the athletic director are calling him Coach Prime.
Yes. That part is still weird and will always be weird.
It was in the graphic. It was in the first paragraph, the fourth paragraph, the sixth paragraph. Like, this
it's in the headline of my column.
Like, you really have, if you are Deion Sanders, you have this whole university in the palm of your hand. Like, this is, and that's not a bad, I'm not saying he's taking advantage of it, because again, it's working their ticket sales, the attention, like the points about the TV slots and the TV draw. And since media value is everything in the modern college sports world, he is doing all of that. And he took over a program that went 1-11. He had them tied for first place in the Big 12 standings, being a legitimate college football playoff contender coming down the stretch in just 2 years. I think the expectations are, okay, you are the highest paid coach in the Big 12. You should have a Big 12 title contender almost every single season, because being a Big 12 title contender means you're a college football playoff contender. I think that being among the list of coaches that are up there, obviously at the top, you've got coaches who've won national championships, but even your Steve Sarkisian is sort of around there. Kalen DeBoer, is kind of around there. And Bill Belichick's the weird one too. Also being big. It's like, Bill Belichick's getting $10 million. Deion Sanders absolutely should get $10 million. Here's the other piece of this that stands out. Financial security for coach and university. If Jerry Jones does pick up the phone and says, I want Deion. I ain't going to circumcise a mosquito, but I do want Deion. He's going to have to pay a whole bunch of money to Colorado to get Deion Sanders or anybody else for that, any NFL team. The buyout that would go to Colorado if Deion Sanders were to get plucked away by the NFL is going to be significant. And also, if for some reason things go south, or Rick George, the athletic director, or the university president who love Coach Prime, if they leave and somebody else comes in, now Deion Sanders has some financial stability as well. I kind of feel like it's a sensible deal. It is not one I saw coming. I didn't have murmurs of it. I wasn't trying to report out the Deion contract extension, but it arrived. We did some breaking news HQ on it, and I sat back and I thought about it, and I was like, okay, you know what? I think that this is a really good deal for both coach and university.
I also think there's an aspect of this too that I think often gets overlooked just based on the name of the coach and the money. It's a lot like NFL quarterbacks. Like if you look at the list of the highest paid NFL quarterbacks, it's not exactly Patrick Mahomes at number one. It was never Tom Brady at number one. It was always the quarterback who just got the deal, lately. And you see a lot of that with college coaches. Like the next coach who signs a contract extension is probably going to get $10 million a year. It just seems to be the going rate right now for being a college head coach in one of the power conferences. If you want to be taken seriously, you kind of have to pay your coach around $10 million a year.
Yep, I'd agree with that. From the tailgate before we got started, Jerry B, congrats to Coach Prime in Colorado. A move many people laughed at is paying off big time, and not just for Deion. Danny, that speaks to the unnamed media member who decided to set himself up to get freezing cold takes. And then this one, as we were having the discussion, KC3, does this put the nail in the coffin for Deion coaching in the NFL?
No. Because Jerry Jones, I was looking at the details. In a couple years, it's $12 million after, if it's in 25, the buyout, it's $10 million in 26. Then it drops to $6 million in 27. But even if it was in 2 years and it was $10 million, Jerry Jones could write that check. I don't think he even has to move anything around to make sure it clears.
And if he keeps having success, especially post Shador and Travis, like he's still going to be a very, hot commodity on the market.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Do you believe him when he has talked about, I know on 60 Minutes and elsewhere, about the makeup of coaching an NFL player versus coaching college kids and his desire? You believe it? Like
there's a huge difference, Danny. I think you can speak to this.
No. Do you believe Deion Sanders that he prefers coaching college kids? And that,
I think he prefers players. I think he prefers players who will listen to him and look up to him as somebody that has been there and done that. And I think we're starting to blur the lines between professional and amateur, clearly. But I still think there is a difference between an NFL player and a college player. And there's a difference in age. When you're 18 to 22, you're looking up for a role model, somebody. And I do think that's where he probably does feel a sweet spot. I still don't think it means he's not going back, but I do take him at his word.
Yeah, like you're getting paid in college, but there's still a certain naivete among a 19-year-old compared to a 26-year-old who's been in the NFL for 3 years now.
I mean, you're going to be a little bit, you're not going to try to fight back, right?
Well, you're still the highest paid. Like he's still making 10. What's his, highest paid player is probably making 2, maybe.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe.
If he took the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys and he was making 10, his quarterback would be making 6x what he's making.
Yeah.
That
power dynamic helping him out in a really big way. So fun time for Colorado football. Coach Prime. They say he's teaching. I was looking at that, looking at the release. He's I can't
remember what class he was teaching.
Yeah,
he's got a great gig.
Yeah,
I mean he's set it up where he probably. I mean, and I know he's giving Coach Bowden credit, but he probably watched the way Coach Bowden did it when he was at Florida State. He delegates. Now the difference is he doesn't travel the way Coach Bowden is, but he doesn't have to. There is some truth in, I don't have to go to your living room. You come to mine. And the way we talked about this with the portal, they are more business transaction. It is more, when was the last time you saw an NFL coach go to some player's house? You don't see it. They just come, they want to see your facilities. They want to talk to you in person, and then you either sign with them or you don't. So he's got his TV show. He's got Hall of Famers on his staff. He's got a pretty good setup.
Would Florida State hire him if they made a move on Mike Norvell?
Well, that's a good the buyout details become a little bit more interesting there too, because that becomes a little bit cost prohibitive.
Yeah, because you would have to pay the Mike Norvell buyout and then also contribute to the Colorado one as well. Will be very interesting. Coming up on the other side, diving into some of your questions, including the future of Maryland athletics. All that and more. Next.
I feel home when I see the faces that remember my own. When I'm with my friends, I feel home.
Back here on the Cover 3 podcast. Before we got going, our friend Bluxton at around 9:11 a.m. Eastern Time jumped in and said, Terps fan here. In this era of NIL, rev share, and transfer portal, what would you guys be looking for if you were in charge of hiring Maryland's new athletic director?
I don't know why Kevin Willard calls himself Bluxton 46 online. I don't know. I think Maryland is in an interesting spot in that it's still, I think, in its ACC roots, and I think we saw it kind of reflected in what's happened this spring. I think Maryland is still a basketball school at heart that is trying to make that transition to being what you kind of need to be financially in the modern game. So if I'm looking for a new athletic director, I might be trying to hire somebody who doesn't have ties to the school, who might come in with a fresh look on things that maybe you're not used to. But it also depends what Maryland wants to be. Like, do you want to be a basketball school that you just hope gets to a bowl game in football, or do you want to actually try to compete in football to make sure you're still around in a few years?
It's an interesting question. I do think the whole role of AD is shifting, because we're seeing, Andrew Luck is in this unique type of role. But even with that, is he in charge? Is there like a football AD in his role? Like, is he overseeing? He's just over football, right? And then there's Bernard Muir is over him. He's the CEO. So I think he wants somebody who's got more of a business background. I think that's probably the biggest difference.
Or a lawyer.
Or an attorney, exactly.
These
Totally
coaches are going to be fighting with each other. I mean, it's like you've got to be a mediator to be able to keep all these coaches and programs happy. I mean, I don't think Kevin Willard was complaining about Maryland basketball NIL. I think he was talking about the funding for his staff, the funding for the program, and he was like preparing for war of what's going to happen when the decisions have to be made with revenue sharing moving forward. I think that a factor of him taking the Villanova job is Villanova doesn't have a football program. And just like, the Big East and the Atlantic 10, like that rev share money is going to be pumped into basketball, and along with resources and everything else that have always been there for the Big East. I think that's, he came from Seton Hall, right? He's
a basketball coach. He wants to be in the basketball league.
Yeah.
And also, like, one thing, and this is something that the Big Ten has to deal with, and I don't think it'll be the last Big Ten school that's got this kind of situation. You're in the Big East. You're not traveling across the country to play games. In the Big Ten, you're Maryland. You've got to fly to L.A., Seattle, or, Oregon for games in conference. That's not everybody's going to enjoy doing that, especially when you're on the farther East Coast.
You have to make one trek to Omaha. Somewhere in middle America. And
that feels like forever compared to most of your other trips, which are just short little bus rides for the most part.
Yeah, no. It's like when Mike Loxley was asked about it, and he comes out and he's like, I really wish he wouldn't air the dirty laundry, or, something along those lines. I'm paraphrasing. I was like, sounds like someone who's got the upper hand in this negotiation. The football coach being like, hey, yeah, that's right, because we drive the bus around here. All right. We enjoy this time of year, being able to make things a little bit interactive, getting to hear from you. So let's hop in the elevator and go on down to the mailroom. This next question, here we go. This question came from Andrew. Andrew says, great show. Love tuning in when commuting and working around the house. My question for you is about, all right, you guys know the domino meme, right? The small domino and then the big domino. My question for all you is about the fit of college football within the domino meme. It seems like we're headed to a future where college football is entirely separated from the NCAA. Conferences may cease to exist. Teams may be affiliated but not part of universities. Who knows? What do you think is the one seminal event that set us on this path, parentheses, the small domino, and where do you think we end up, the large domino? He offers a few events that come to mind are SMU getting the death penalty, maybe Northwestern or Dartmouth's athlete unionization efforts, and more.
I mean, I think there are a lot of things responsible for this. What was the 1 year Auburn finished undefeated and didn't get to the BCS title game?
2004.
Yeah.
No, because this was pre-BCS. I'm talking. Like the Cadillac Williams, Ronnie Brown teams.
No, that was 04, I think. That was because there were 2 BCS and they didn't get into the 2.
Who was it then? Then who was it in before the BCS that finished undefeated and it was third in the polls?
Like in the 90s?
Yeah.
Was it a 97 year? That's a split national
Either
title.
way, it was some team getting left out of a national title poll that caused everybody to say we have to have a playoff. You know what? It's Dan Wetzel's fault. Dan Wetzel, who wrote Death to the BCS along with, it was Jeff Passan. I think somebody else was in that book with him too. I cannot remember. Dan Wetzel wrote that book, and now Arizona's in the Big 12 and Oregon's in the Big 10. Thanks, Dan. Thanks. And then you just left Patton Ross high and dry. Wow. Come on, Dan. I'm kidding.
I've got one. The Big 10 Network. Or maybe the Longhorn Network.
Yeah.
Which one was first? The Big 10 was the first conference network?
Yeah, because the very first game is App State, Michigan.
I got one.
A good one.
Who invented the television?
Oh, yeah. No, but like, to me, the 1984 Supreme Court decision for Oklahoma and Georgia, against the NCAA, where no longer the NCAA controls your television rights. To me, the start of all of these, when we're talking about the small domino, it's not necessarily the SMU death penalty or anything to do specifically with paying players, as much as it is the idea that television running college football and running college sports has to start with something tied to television. And I think that's why the NCAA versus Oklahoma Supreme Court decision could be your small domino. I liked the Longhorn Network aspect of it too, because you could say that was the beginning of like conference realignment, like the way that the Big 12 had the internal fighting around the Longhorn Network and what it led to in terms of, disruption within that conference, the way it's been picked apart, the way that the different pieces on the board, Texas and Oklahoma included. And for the Big 10 Network, I would only throw that in there just because it would be the moment that you really saw the Big 10 jump into the forefront of being one of the powers, right? That the Big 10 was able to create an infrastructure around these huge universities with a cable package and a premium network that were going to be able to have cost certainty and guarantee money for all of its member institutions. And then that became something that every other conference did emulate in one way or another. So yeah, maybe small one is the Oklahoma Supreme Court decision, but I think it's got to be something television related.
What about the Ed O'Bannon
television
case?
Related though. NCAA versus Oklahoma was going to court because the NCAA was picking the games that could be televised.
Right. Yeah, I'm saying any one of those things I would take there. But the Ed O'Bannon case.
That's huge with the NIL aspect of players.
NIL.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen without TV first, because where did the money come from?
Oh, because Ed O'Bannon's argument was like, look how much value players are bringing to the university.
Mm-hmm.
And even though in the case we were talking about EA Sports, it was also the larger discussion of your image and likeness. I mean, name, image, and likeness, that you were giving that up, and the university was profiting at a way and at a level that had gotten unfair based on the way things had exploded.
So you know what? I take it back. It is not Dan Wetzel's fault. Dan, you are forgiven. It is Keith Jackson's fault. That syrupy, delightful voice just lured in so many television viewers to college football games and made them fall in love with his folksy little, whatchamacallits. And now here we are. Rutgers is in the Big Ten.
Yeah, Big Ten Network is why Maryland and Rutgers go to the Big Ten.
Mm-hmm.
Cable boxes, baby. When cable boxes mattered over everything. What about the Big Domino? Where do you think it's headed?
2 leagues. 2 20-ish team leagues. 40 schools total, maybe a little more. But I just don't know how long it's going to take to get there, but I just think that as television starts really going further here, you're going to consolidate, because there's only so much inventory you're going to want. There's only so much inventory that's going to be worth it to you after a while, because you're kind of making a lot of these schools obsolete as it is. Then you toss in the fact that with the revenue sharing and the NIL, for some of these schools, it is going to start becoming even more cost prohibitive to even kind of field Division I FBS football teams, and they might make those decisions to get rid of it. And plus, if you just look at the education overall in this country right now, who the hell knows what colleges are even going to look like in 20 years? A lot of them might just be getting rid of football departments or just disappearing.
What do you think, Danny?
I think it is. I think there is going to be, 2 super conferences, super leagues. I do wonder, is it going to be this one overarching body? I think it's going to look even more like the NFL. But apart from that, I have no idea what it's going to look like as far as how they're affiliated with the schools, with other athletic departments. There's so much that's on the table that has to be figured out. I really don't have a clue there, but I do think you will see, like Tom said, 40, 48 teams that are kind of in this illustrious higher level, and then there's a whole bunch of others that are left behind, which sucks.
Yeah, I think it could look like the original NFL, which was the NFL and the AFL. Right. And then the Super Bowl was created when the champs of both leagues face each other. I think the Big Ten and the SEC would kind of fill that NFL and AFL role, and then obviously the playoff format would be different than what the NFL went with. But I don't know, man. I just, as a fan, putting everything else aside, I would just really wish we could hurry the hell up and get these guys to being employees, so that way we can sign them to contracts. So like you're looking at the college basketball off season now, where it's like we talked about it before the show, like the Crown starts tonight. It's a bunch of teams whose half their teams are in the portal. As soon as teams are getting knocked out of the tournament, their players are entering the portal. Like every single year, a college basketball team is a completely new roster. You're starting to see it go more and more that way in football too. I would just like, for the sake of the sport as a fan, to actually keep those threads that you kind of had with your team. That wasn't just the school, it was the players themselves. Make them employees. Just figure it out. Get it done. Cut through all the red tape you have to do. Get it done. Sign them to contracts, and let's move on so the sport can just get to the next level where it needs to go.
One more here. This one was a live question. And this, since we were running back through old college football playoffs, or trying to come up with the matchups of what they would be, Coach K33 jumped in a little after 9 o'clock and said that Ken Palm ranks this upcoming men's basketball Final Four as the best ever. What is the best group of 4 teams in the college football playoff era? He also offers up a group of what would be the best Final Four if we did it in the BCS era as well. I feel like that's a lot harder for us to figure out with our simple public school brains right here. I think that if we go in the 10 years of the 4-team era, which of the 10 years had the highest quality, the 2025 Final Four of the college football playoff era, which year do you think it would be?
This is going to be weird, because there's one school that's not in here that you would think would be in here. But I would argue the 2019 season, when you had, LSU, which might have been the best college football team of all time, undefeated, Ohio State, undefeated, Clemson, undefeated, and Oklahoma at 12-1. I would argue that if you're looking for the best foursome, that was probably the season. And I mentioned it's weird because you would think Alabama's going to be in it, but I just think that when you go through the list, that to me is the year that stands out as being like, oh yeah, those were 4 really good teams. And then LSU dog walked them.
And to your point about that, the Oklahoma team in there, the like sore thumb, the odd team out, that was Jalen Hurts, that was Lamb, and their only loss was 48-41 at Kansas State in Manhattan. Like, no, that was a model of consistency. The top 5.
Was that Jalen or was that Kyler?
That was Jalen. Kyler was 18.
All right, you're right. Yep.
Kyler was against Bama, right?
Yep.
Yeah, Jalen Hurts, CeeDee Lamb. You had Grant Calcaterra, Creed Humphrey, Kenneth Murray. It's a good team. Really, really good team. Only loss being by 7 points in Manhattan. That's absolutely excusable. I like that shout right there with especially the 3 undefeated teams. Clemson showed. Was that Clemson showing up to the playoff on like a 29-game winning streak too?
Yeah.
Because then they beat Ohio State in that crazy Fiesta Bowl. Does that sound right?
They won it the year before, right?
Yeah, Clemson had won it in 2018. So then they show
that was the I haven't lost in like 7 years Clemson team. Yep.
Okay. So
the Trevor Lawrence teams.
2019 is a good one. All right. Any others that you would show to Danny? It looks like you're scanning.
I was the first one with. I mean, Florida State got housed by Oregon, but that was Jameis. There were a ton of NFL players. Florida State was coming off the 13 national title. Then you had Marcus Mariota.
So overrated though. The second, not the national title team. The first year of the playoff, that team was overrated.
But the other ones
weren't. Remember, they played with their food against everybody, and then we just have all these miraculous. Jameis keeps leading all these miraculous comebacks against teams they should have stuffed in a locker. Yeah, it's hard to keep that thing going.
Of course, the difference is the average age of this year's Auburn roster is like 32. So.
What you mean?
Just saying, like none of these football teams are full of 30-year-olds like Auburn's basketball team.
That's true. Let BYU get there. Maybe we can have it.
I saw the stat like Auburn's average starting 5 age is older than like 8 NBA teams' average starting 5.
Yeah, it's insane how old they are.
Like
their average age is almost the same as the Oklahoma City Thunder. They're like
team?
Only 6 months apart. Like in Oklahoma City's older, but it's not by much.
Like if you'd put the Washington Wizards into the Sweet 16 by average age, I think they would have ranked 11th or 12th.
Wow. In terms of team quality, does 23 have an argument here? That would be 13-0 Michigan, 13-0 Washington, 12-1 Texas, 12-1 Alabama.
There's an argument, yeah.
I fall short there because that wasn't even an awesome Alabama team.
Yeah, and I just come back to what would 2019 LSU have done to 2023 Michigan?
What would 2019 LSU have done?
Probably would have beat them by 20.
Georgia was probably the best team in the SEC that year. Just happened to lose in the SEC championship game.
So there was also that Florida State team that got left out. I don't know if you remember them.
Well, it's about who you don't want to play. Right. That's
right.
That's what we asked, is who don't you want to play? The 22, this is a mention in the tailgate, talked about 22 semifinals were good. Like the games themselves, I don't think that the team quality would be in like a KenPom power ratings type thing. I don't know if the 22 playoff would go down as having an argument as one of the best ever. That would be Georgia, Michigan,
Ohio State,
TCU, Ohio State. So Georgia, Ohio State, and TCU, Michigan were both incredible games. Like the national semifinal night of that New Year's Eve was fantastic. But I don't think that from a power rating standpoint, which is kind of what we're doing here more or less, if we're referencing KenPom, I don't think that they would be able to touch the that 2019 playoff. All right. Let's go.
If you take the 2 semis from 2022, the average point total for the 4 teams in those games was the same as the deficit in the title game.
Hey, you want to
I'm just
remind
making that
everybody
up. I
what
don't
the
know if that's
deficit in
true.
the title game is?
It was 65-7. So no, that can't be true because that's 58 points, and nobody scored 58 points in the semis. But the joke still works, in my opinion.
And it was a record-setting postseason game until the very next season when we had another record-setting postseason game. You know, that record was only able to stand for about 350 some odd days. Hate it. You forgot, Tom? Did you forget?
What was the record?
The record happened when a team won by 60. Final score 63-3.
In the playoff?
No, in the postseason.
Oh, okay. Okay, never mind. Sorry.
Boy, we're just Bud's out. We only have one Seminole here.
What the hell did Danny do?
My
Chip's
goodness.
Jesus. Come on, Chip.
No. All right.
Because Bud wouldn't even care. Bud would just be like,
let's go back to let's go back to the big old bag of mail. This one comes from Spartan in Chicago. Greetings, gentlemen from Thailand. I don't live here, just visiting on my honeymoon.
I don't live here. I'm just on my honeymoon and sending in a question to the Cover 3 podcast.
I love it. On my long flight over here, I was catching up on the podcast and thinking about the future of the sport. My question is, what can programs like Michigan State that are stuck in the middle do to remain respectable and not get left out from whatever changes come next? Also, any advice for a newlywed?
Go spend your honeymoon with your wife.
Maybe go watch a little White Lotus together since it's in Thailand. You know,
yeah, it'll definitely make you feel good about your resort.
Yes, exactly. Is Michigan State? I mean, I feel like there's more now than there has been, especially with this new NIL era that we're in, where it shouldn't feel as helpless. I mean, we just had Indiana make the college football playoff. I'm like, man, Michigan State, it was not that long ago. You were going to Rose Bowls and rattling off double-digit win seasons. Give your coach, give Jonathan Smith some support, give him backing. They do have some boosters that have some pretty good money. Just keep chopping wood, keep going to work, I was
having this conversation actually yesterday with a friend who's also a Big Ten alum. I think that most Big Ten programs are in a position where you're just hoping to be the 5th best team. And then hopefully you have like a year like Indiana where you can sneak into the top 4 because one of the top 4 programs has a down season. And I think you will see more of those teams having down seasons because the way things are working right now, there's like the whole reload thing where teams load up with seniors and then those guys all graduate and then they might come back down to earth a little bit because the schedules are more difficult. But I do think that once you get to that 4-4-2-2-1-1 hut, whatever model that they're going to do, like that's going to be the goal for most teams. Like Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan should be at the top of the league pretty much every year. You've just kind of got to hope you can cycle up one of those years to sneak in. And I think that's just going to be the reality, even with NIL, because everybody's going to have the money to spend. But those are still the schools that are recruiting at a level that's going to keep them in the picture, whereas these other schools can't really recruit at that level.
I think that you have to have the, like, you've got to overcompensate with your evaluation and sort of like onboarding process. You've got to be able to find players that are going to fit exactly what you want to do. I don't think that if you are, it's quote unquote stuck in the middle, because like even in basketball, I don't think Michigan State has a top end NIL war chest. I think they can. I don't think they're broke.
I think that's more the coach than it's the operation. I think Tom Izzo doesn't want to go out and be like, I'm just going to go buy the best.
I'm going to go put together the Arkansas roster.
Yeah, Izzo still wants to develop those kids. He wants to keep them around. So I don't think that's a booster problem. I don't even think it's a problem. I just think that's the coach.
It's a philosophy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you see the stat on the Sweet 16 teams of how many of the starting 5, how many teams in the Sweet 16 starting 5 started at the school? Mm-hmm. Only one had all 5 started at the one school. It was Purdue. Nerds. 2 of them, Michigan State and Duke, had 4 out of 5 starters started there. And then it was Then it was good luck trying to figure out what team was the graphic because they just had the logos and they were all 4 and 5 different schools.
Auburn's lineup started before colleges even existed. They were like coming from like coal mines.
You find you see all the different FAU logos in there. You can see all the different Belmont logos in there. Like, dude, these teams are amazing. Like Jonathan Smith has to be able to find really good defensive linemen that are not demanding top dollar. Jonathan Smith needs to be able to go and recruit players and retain players that maybe were a little bit slept on. He is not going to win. He's not going to go toe-to-toe with the top teams in the conference, and certainly not even like the larger picture. He's not going down into Georgia and beating out the dogs for a player that Kirby Smart wants. So if you're stuck in the middle, I think responsibility is going to come back to the head coach, the coaching staff, and sort of everything that you're building around it. The good news for Michigan State is that all of us seem to believe, based on what he did at Oregon State, that Jonathan Smith is a good head coach, and that hopefully he would be able to do that, to not only prepare a team, prepare a quarterback, prepare an offense to go win on Saturday, but to be able to do the things that are going to put together a roster that is competitive. I mean, they won like 9 games? Oregon State, the last couple of years before he ended up leaving for Michigan State, was one of the top 30 programs, top 30 teams in the sport. So he's shown the ability to do that in Corvallis. Can you do that in East Lansing as well? So any program that feels like they're quote unquote stuck in the middle, I think that's where you've got to put a lot of faith in whoever you've got leading the program. How did Indiana go from being stuck at the bottom to being in the college football playoff? They hired Kurt Signetti. And
they bought a winning scratch-off ticket because so many of their transfers hit. And that's really hard to do. Like we saw it with Florida State. And then you see it's like when you're really reliant on the portal, if all of them hit, you're going to have a really good season. It's just hard for all of them to hit.
Now, he had an evaluation edge, literally bringing players from James Madison. But some of the other pieces that were added as well, I think, don't you give the Indiana staff credit for that success? I mean, it's not all luck. It's not all.
No, but there's no great team is great without a little bit of luck, Chip. And if you don't have the overall talent edge, you need more luck than the rest.
Yep. All right. Any other recommendations for these teams stuck in the middle?
Retain.
Yeah. Can't lose players.
Get old and keep them.
Yep. We will be back on Wednesday, 11 a.m. Eastern time. Hey, look, we actually got some spring games coming up this weekend. We'll tell you who's playing where, what we might be keeping our eye on for those teams that still do observe the great college football tradition of the spring scrimmage, and so much more. Get in your questions for Thursday's edition of the Big Old Bag of Mail. And you can follow him on Twitter at Tom Fornelli. You can follow him at Danny Kanell. You can follow me at Chip_Patterson. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Move aside, Final Four. We got spring.